Welcome everyone to Be Real Talks. I'm Sophia Givry. Today we are welcoming Dr. Calvin Gantt. He is a Binghamton University alum and has over 20 years experience in higher education. In this field, he has taken on a variety of roles such as Counselor of Disability Services and Director of Access and Opportunity Programs. Currently, he is a Chief Diversity Officer. Calvin describes himself as a servant leader who believes that relationships built on trust and mutual respect are the foundation for collaboration and service. He is also an advocate for mentorship and is particularly passionate about nurturing the development of first-generation, low-income, and underrepresented minority students. Today, we're going to be looking at representation in the workplace. Thank you so much for joining us, Calvin.
No problem. I'm glad for the opportunity.
So just to kind of get us started here so we can get to know more about you, can you let us know how your personal experience and identity really influenced your career path?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I am a Binghamton, well, at that time it was SUNY Binghamton, so now Binghamton University alum. And at the time when I came to Binghamton, I came through the Education Opportunity Program. So for me, the program was a lifeline. I'm the only person in my family to have gone to college. And so having the opportunity through EOP to be able to make that a reality really was a life-changing thing for me. And to go away from home for the first time and engage with being on a college campus, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about the people that are around you. But even more importantly, strangely to me, I learned a lot about what I didn't know. I didn't know at the time when I went away to school at Binghamton, for example, that I was poor. I didn't conceptually know that I was poor. So that was a wake-up call when you're talking with kids who ask you questions like, where are you going for spring break and things of that nature. And it just wasn't something that was a part of my lived experience. And so I grew up a lot through my experience at Binghamton and through the EOP program, and received wonderful nurturing and mentoring through that program. And although I thought in my career I was going to be headed to law school, that was what they call PPL, or Politics, Philosophy, and Law major at Binghamton. And although I was interested in law school and applied to law school, really all of my experiences while I was a student there were kind of a combination of law and social work, strangely enough. So I did quite a few internships and externship experiences that really gave me the perspective that, maybe the counseling direction of things was the way for me to go. I fought it. I fought it tooth and nail because I knew that it wasn't going to make me a lot of money. Let's just be real about that. And because I did find out that I was poor after going to Binghamton, I wanted a job that was going to warrant me making more money. But at the end of the day, when the opportunities presented themselves, it continued to come back to me that I had a skill set in working with folks that looked like me, that had similar experiences to me, and that I could make a difference in their lived experience. So that's kind of how I got on the trajectory of doing work in opportunity programs, which I did for 20 years after I graduated, and now doing the work that I'm doing at a much larger level from a college perspective as a Chief Diversity Officer. I still know that work is foundational to everything that I do. So that's very important in knowing where I came from and what I still have to do and what it's going to take to make change. Those things all came through that experience and the knowledge that I gained there. And so I bring all of that to the work that I do now as a Chief Diversity Officer. And I think it's helped me in building the relationships that I have at my current institution.
Yeah, that's very full circle, right? You know, from your journey and how you were impacted and understanding your identity and who you were, and then being able to kind of take on those leadership roles and kind of give back to students who are in those similar situations. So thinking about, you know, you've been in so many leadership positions, such as, you know, director, chief diversity officer. What are some of the benefits of people from historically underrepresented communities having that seat at the table?
Well, I think again, because you come with a variety of different perspectives and experience, lived experiences, similar to the students that are going to be entering the institution, not having a seat at that table, I think, of course, creates a void. It creates a void in understanding. It creates a void in terms of empathy. It creates a void in even knowing how to build the programs necessary to not only attract the students, but to retain and graduate the students. So not having a seat at that table really for most institutions leaves those institutions in a really, really vulnerable place as it relates to, the success of the students of color that may be coming through their respective institutions. So for me, that's one of the reasons why having a seat at the table is essential.
Yeah, that equal representation or working our way to equal representation for sure. And then building on that a little bit. So, you know, you've been in those rooms and you've been able to voice your opinions, but there is this notion of playing the game, right? So for those who are unfamiliar, it can be thought of as kind of abiding by the rules, kind of going to what is expected of you. Some people talk about it of, well, I just have to play the game. That's what I have to do to get out of poverty. And some people can kind of see it in a negative way. So what advice do you have for students that are resistant to playing the game or just working for a company that doesn't completely mirror their values?
Right. Well, I mean, the playing of the game aspect of things, is going to be, as you said, seen very differently depending on, what that student's experience or background is. If they're a first generation college student and they have not had anyone, cousins, family members, go to college, I think it's a very different kind of mindset than maybe someone who's had a relative that's gone to school. I think they come into the institution a little bit more savvy in terms of what they need to do in order to get to where they want to go. But I always found that it was partially my responsibility and obviously the counselors that work with the students. It was partially their responsibility to help connect the dots for the students, to help them to move away from the mindset of it being a game, but understanding that this is the way systems work, and that you need to understand the system before you can change the system. And that's something that is very difficult if you've never been a part of a system. You don't know that there actually is a system to all of this. There's a systemness. And those that have had the advantage of knowing people who've gone through that system have very little difficulty navigating it. But if you have not gone through the system, it's a completely new world for you. So I try to help students understand that it's not necessarily about the playing of the game. It's about understanding how the systems that our society has created that either allow you in or in some cases keep you out of higher education. And since you have that opportunity, since you were granted that opportunity through a variety of different means, what do you do with that opportunity? Do you then take that opportunity and go back to your community and help people to understand what it takes to get into the system? Because if you don't go back and do that, or people that look like you don't go back and do that, then the system wins. So again, it's talking with all of the students and helping them understand that they have a vested responsibility in going back. I mean, that's the reason why programs like EOP continue to thrive and do as well as they do, as we have so many alumni that are willing to go back and talk to students or mentor students and remind them that, I am where you were. And I am where I'm going, I'm where I am now in terms of my job because I learned the system, and then I learned how to appreciate my own worth and value as it relates to that system. Because again, that's another learning curve for you. And you mentioned about, going to companies that sometimes don't match your values. Again, that's one of the things you have to be mindful of. Are you chasing the money or are you chasing the experience? If you're chasing the money, then you are likely going to wind up in many situations in an environment that doesn't necessarily match your values. So you have to do some thinking about what those values are before you sign on the dotted line for that particular industry. So when you're interviewing, are you asking the appropriate questions about, what opportunities are there for mentoring? For me as an employee of color, are there what they call employee reflection groups or response groups within the within the company? If not, is there an opportunity for those things to be created or developed? Again, so it depends on what it is you're looking for. Do you want to be a part of the institution? Are you willing to be the person that leads some of that change? And because of that initiative, you may open doors to opportunities within the company that may otherwise not have been available to you. So just again, saying to people, you have to know and navigate for yourself. What do you want that experience to look like? No longer are we doing 20 and 30 years at a company anymore. But if you're going to invest in working for a company for 2 to 5 years, what is it at the end of the day that you, from a skill perspective, want to take away from that company that puts you in the best position to move on to the next thing it is that you want to do, either in your career or if you want to go out and start your own business? What is it that you need to develop in yourself in order to be able to do that and do that effectively? So again, I think the way you couch it and the way you help them to understand it makes it, or helps, I think, move from being a game to understanding that this is the way we navigate systems.
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack there. You said a lot of really valuable things, and that just emphasis on critical thinking. I think that sometimes students are so fast paced, right? Got to get this degree, got to finish it in 4 years, because there is that. I know I was one of those students, admittedly, that pressure to try to get out of poverty, and you can't spend more money and more time in college. But if you really think about it, if you are reflective beforehand, it actually ends up saving you time, right, in the long run, because you can reflect, you understand what your values are, and then also manage your career appropriately. Like you said, what is it, money that's motivating me? Can I make changes in a place that doesn't completely represent my beliefs? So super important.
Mm-hmm. And be willing to walk away from that. You have to be willing to walk away from the money. If it really compromises who you are and what your values are, are you prepared to walk away from the money and go towards the experience that's going to allow you at the end of the day to go home and feel good about what it is that you're doing? Because money is great, but you don't get to sleep with it. You don't get to, you don't get to have conversations with it. You don't get to help people in the community understand what you're trying to do just with the money that you make. You have to do that through other avenues. So if you're able to build a foundation for yourself through other things that allow you to continue to develop who you want to be, that's different. But if you're trying to put all of those eggs in one basket through the company, I find that there are very, very few companies in the world that actually can fulfill that much of anyone's needs.
Yeah, for sure. And what would you say to students that are trying to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion? What are some tips you have, whether it be for the workplace or on campus?
Well, probably the biggest thing that I would say to them, and it's been true throughout my whole career. No matter where you work, no matter where you go to school, everyone wants to be the best. Okay, every company, every institution wants to be on someone's list as the best. Okay, knowing that going into whatever company or institution that you might work for, you have to figure out what aspects of diversity helps that institution or company become the best. what research can you do about those specific things that helps the company see? You know, when you go to, you have that opportunity to talk with your boss, and you can say, well, I know some of our peer companies or our peer institutions are doing X, Y, and Z as it relates to diversity, and they're experiencing higher retention graduation rates, which then allow them to apply for federal and state grants that we as an institution aren't. So bringing that information forward sometimes to the institution gives them a very different perspective about what's in it for them. But what you're actually doing is creating a more welcoming environment for the students, you know, that your institution or company serves. So you have to be willing to do that research and come to them with those things that are important to them. You got to know what the mission is, what the goals are of the company, what do they value and what's important. What does that mission statement say? And repeat that to them in your responses and your answers as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure that people at my institution sometimes get tired of hearing me quote our mission, but I remind them of that because equity, diversity, and inclusion is listed in our mission. And so if our decision making is not inclusive of those three categories, then we're not making decisions that are best for all students that we serve. And that's my job, that, you know, I am to repeat and keep reminding people of that because it's an important aspect of what we do. We are a community college. In the middle of that is community. So if we're not respecting or representing the community that we serve, at some point we become antiquated and not a place that people respect. And so we always want to be, as I said, we always want to be first. We always want to be respected. And so you have to continue to remind people that part of that means that you have to be paying attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that if you're doing that and finding ways to be able to make those inroads, even when you find resistance, because there's going to be resistance because the perception is that it's always going to cost you a lot more money. But sometimes you have to put money into what it is you're trying to do to recognize that at the end, because we invested this much upfront, we were able to actually go out and apply for other monies that pretty much wiped out what we spent upfront. And again, so how do you lay that plan out? So I even say to students, as you're going through your different majors and you have opportunities and they say, pick whatever topic or subject you want to do your research on, be thinking about where you want to go and use those as opportunities to gather information and knowledge that you otherwise would not have access to. That's going to serve you well when you go to interview. That's going to serve you well for any job that you do. And the fact that you can even show that you not only are interested in it, but you've actually done research on it and be able to demonstrate that to any agency is going to put you in a good place. So
that's a very strategic approach there, and holding the people accountable, right? I feel like mission statements and visions are the kind of thing people write it and they just never look back to it, right?
Exactly.
Which is very problematic because there's so much built into those statements that we should be following. So I like that constant reminder there of, no, this is what we should be focused on, and for students to be aware that it's perfectly fine for them to do that in the workplace.
Right. Because otherwise, truly, from a student standpoint, then we have sold you something and told you that if you come to our institution, this is the product that you can expect as a participant in our institution. And if we're not delivering on that, then we have sold students a false sense of what they should expect from our institution. And so that's on us. You know, that's on those people that are in administration, like myself now, to be paying attention to that because, you know, again, your word is supposed to be your bond. You know, your mission is supposed to be, at the end of the day, what people get out of it. And if that's not happening, then we need to revisit it and come up with a mission that we actually can abide by.
And kind of speaking on the side of if these initiatives aren't happening, what are some of the obstacles that you've seen, whether it be as a chief diversity officer or any role that you've had really when it comes to hiring and retaining qualified candidates from marginalized communities?
Well, I would say, from my end, one of the biggest and most significant drawbacks is the fact that most of the companies or institutions have a very small minority faculty and staff population to begin with. And so one of the things that we know from research is that, and we talked about it with ELP, that mentoring piece is extremely important. So if there are no opportunities within the company to have a mentor, and the company is not meeting your values, then you're not likely to want to stay with that company, because what is the value added for you of participating in that company? So from my end, that's one of the biggest things, is because you don't have the numbers to be able to provide new employees with that sense of community when they come with it to your institution or to the company, then it's much more difficult to retain them, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for people who have a common experience or a shared experience than that they do. And they're willing to come to a company that doesn't have that initially. Most people are willing to come to a company that doesn't have that initially. But after a certain period of time, words matter and actions matter. So if you haven't moved the needle, and you came and you were one of two, and 5 years later you're still one of two, you see that diversity may not be is not the highest priority maybe for that particular company. And so then you have to start questioning and asking yourself, is it worth it for me to stay here, or do I go towards a company that through research is actually demonstrating through their activities and actions that diversity is important to them? And so that's one of the biggest hurdles, I think, is that. The second big one is when you have the companies, and so many companies now are hiring diversity, equity, and inclusion officers. So outside of just education, many corporations now are hiring diversity, equity, and inclusion officers. But many of them don't have a budget, or they have a very, very small budget. Well, to move the needle on things that are as systematic as racism in higher education or in the workforce, a $10,000 or $30,000 budget, that's really not going to be able to do a whole lot in terms of bringing in speakers, creating opportunities for development for not only your employees of color, but certainly the non-employees of color, to help them understand why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. What's the message coming from the top? And is that message being followed up by action? Again, is it being followed up with resources? If those things don't fall in line with each other, it's a 2-year, maybe 3-year span of time that you see diversity officers staying in certain roles within certain organizations or institutions, because they're seeing that commitment is not growing. And it's very difficult to do this kind of work, if you don't even have the financial support and means to be able to bring in some of the prominent leaders in thought-provoking conversations that you need to have within the company. So that's important.
So I would guess that some of your solutions would be putting more money into these kind of initiatives, for sure, having more representation so that people feel comfortable in the space, right? And it's not that people aren't able to get along with others outside of those who can understand, but it's just there should be people that do understand too, right? So that's just as important. But kind of looking at, so from your perspective, how can you really build diversity, equity, inclusion, equal representation into a workplace, organization, or institution?
Well, I wish I could tell you I had the magic bullet for that. If so, I would be a really rich person. You'd be interviewing me from some island off in the Caribbean somewhere. So I wish I had a quick answer to that. again, I would say to you, it's probably more to do with stick-to-itness, and there's a lot of frustration that comes along with trying to build up these types of programs and these types of initiatives, because you feel like you're constantly swimming upstream, trying to, this person who was in leadership leaves, you bring a new person in, you have to basically retrain them on what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. So you feel like, you're constantly having to stay in training mode. And at some point in time, you start to say, we have to move beyond training and actually move into solutions and action steps. So, for an important thing, I think would be if institutions instituted an equity scorecard. What does that look like? So set some metrics, set some very specific metrics for the institution or for the corporation. We anticipate by this year, we're going to have this percentage of folks of these different backgrounds, and then measure yourself against those numbers and look at what you're doing. Again, that's going to require some resources. If you want to go out and recruit people from companies to come work for you, you actually have to travel sometimes. You actually have to put your ads in places that are going to cost money to be able to do that. Those things all are costly. So you got to make the commitment to being able to do that. But again, you also have to have a wonderful network. Thank goodness for me, we have, for SUNY, we have all of the chief diversity officers. For Western New York, I am the co-president for our Western New York Diversity Officers Group. So you have to have those people that you can bounce ideas off of, and those people you can call and complain about when you're feeling at your low point. You have to have people that you can do that with, who recognize and understand what you're going through, so that you can then return back and do the work that needs to be done. And so I have that, and there's tons of, diversity people that are doing really, really fantastic things, in the country and abroad, and being able to tap into those. And I think a big piece of it too is not forcing yourself to reinvent wheels that are out there too. So do the research. There are some places that are doing things exactly that you are wanting to do within your agency or company. It's just a matter of shifting some of what they do to fit the institution or the company. So don't go out and reinvent a wheel that already exists. It's like, wait, this company is doing that really well. They don't exactly fit the model for our institution, but there are plenty of pieces of what they do that we can translate into what we do and create that same kind of culture for us. So those would be some of the things that I would say needs to happen. Certainly from an institutional standpoint, we have, what the curriculum looks like. How invested are we in our curriculum being reflective of diversity, equity, and inclusion? I know the argument because I hear it all the time. There'll be certain majors and areas of study that would say, well, we can't incorporate it into our department because it doesn't exist. Well, I tell you 9 times out of 10, it exists. They just haven't done the research to find out what exists. And I try to remind people all the time, you don't have to always be the person that creates the knowledge. You can assign it as an assignment, a homework assignment for students to go out and look specifically for companies or agencies or whatever that do diversity as it relates to biology, chemistry, physics. I said, so it's not always that the instructor has to be the physical lead, but they can encourage the development and the thinking by instructing or asking students to go out and bring some of that information back. So that's how we train our students to become more thoughtful in their own development as they prepare themselves to go out, into the workforce. So again, to be mindful of the fact that, you don't have to be the person that creates everything. I think for me, some of the value in the work that I do is the collaborations that I'm able to have across campus with faculty and staff to do the work that I do. There's no way one individual can move an entire campus and change an entire culture for an institution. That's an impossibility for one person to do. But when you are able to build those relationships that we've been talking about, you find who those allies are, and you build those bridges across divisions and across units, and you figure out ways to be able to make opportunities available for more people, more students, both at the institution and within your company. So that's how I would say you have to kind of structure yourself to keep doing the work.
Yeah, so many great insights there. But that last one about collaboration is really, really important because a lot of the times people, I feel, in workspaces can be a little competitive. But really what I've seen is just collaborative efforts, people working around their strengths can be so, so beneficial to the entire organization. So I really want to end on a high note here. What is your proudest achievement in your role?
Wow. My proudest achievement thus far in my role. Well, I have two, so I have to now choose. I have to choose between the two that I want to.
If they're both equally as great, you could share them.
Well, I started my job. I'll try to get both in really quickly. I started my job at Monroe Community College in August of 2018. And when I started, within the first week, so I started on a Monday, that Friday, I was told that the college was going through a reorganization and that I had no staff when I started and that I was going to pick up Title IX and all of the multicultural services office. So that was an interesting first week to be told that you're picking up new assignments. So that was interesting. But I was also told that the college had already been thinking about doing a diversity conference, and they had picked the date, and so it was being put in my hands to pull the diversity conference together. Well, I stated that I started in August. The diversity conference was the first week of October. Yes. So I had to, there was no honeymoon period. I had to hit the ground running and pull together what was a diversity conference for our entire campus and community, because most of our events are open to the community as well. So we were able to pull that off, and most people had told me about the president that anytime you do something for the first time, expect that she's going to criticize what you do, because that's just her style. That's what I was told. So to just expect, no matter what you do, understand that she's going to criticize some aspect of that work. So we pulled it off. The conference went great. It was completely sold out. No one expected that, but we had we were sold out, and we had a waiting list of about 100 people who wanted to participate in the conference. The president pulled me aside in the midst of the conference and, wanted to bring me outside and have a conversation with me. And I'm already in my head thinking, well, I've already been preparing, that she's going to give me some feedback, which is fine. I mean, you're new, you're going to get feedback. So she brought me back outside and she said, I just wanted to, for us to kind of process a little bit what's going on and what's happened and what I've seen thus far as it relates to the conference. I said, okay, fine. She said, exactly. I just wanted you to know that I'm pleasantly surprised that you were able to completely pull it off the way that you did, and I'm appreciative of what you bring to the table and what you're going to bring to the institution. So I'm waiting for the other shoe. I'm like, okay, and so that's the good part. Then you got to get the bad, but she didn't. There wasn't a bad part, and that was what she left me with. So I use that as an example to say to people, don't let other people put into your head what expectations you will have. And so be mindful of that. And so for me, that was a proud accomplishment. And thus far, we've had two conferences. Both have all been sold out completely in my time there. And we're working on our third. The second thing I probably would say is the fact that when I walked into my current institution, well, I'm the inaugural chief diversity officer for my campus. And so there were a lot of places that, my role didn't exist. One of those places was in hiring, in HR. So it's been a labor of love for the last 2 years, but I think it's finally taken place now where I review all job descriptions before they are released to the public to ensure that they include language that is of diversity, equity, and inclusion minded. I also review all of the people that are being considered for first round interviews. And I have access to looking at all of the candidates to look to see whether there were diverse candidates in the pool that were not pulled into the initial first round. And I can send that back to the committee for consideration and review. So again, considering the fact that I have not been at the institution for 2 years yet, to have been able to make that kind of progress in an area of culture that usually is very, tightly held, I think is, for me, an accomplishment that I'm very proud of in the work that I've been able to do thus far at my institution. So I got them both in.
You did. I just think that's very inspiring. I love the work that you do. Thank you so much for really taking the time to talk to me, to talk to our students. I truly appreciate it.
No problem. And, I'm signed up with Fleischman to be a mentor. I have not been paired as of yet with anyone, but, the door remains open for me to do that. I do that just as a matter of course in my work at MCC. I take on new, younger professionals, not necessarily just professionals of color, but certainly professionals of color. And I try to mentor them because I know for me that was such an important part of my development that I can't know that and not put forth that effort for anybody else. So
right. Check out Mentor Match, see if you can find him on there.
Okay.
Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.